Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the Deal Quest podcast. Let's get started. James Brown is an experienced business consultant specializing in helping businesses implement systems and processes to improve team productivity, efficiency, and overall performance. With over 20 years' experience in various industries, he draws on a wealth of knowledge to help businesses achieve their goals. Starting in manufacturing, James took over a busy accommodation facility in his mid-20s. He spent over a decade immersed in top-tier business education, combining these experiences to gain a deep understanding of the business owner challenges. In 2018, he founded BizTech Guru to help others achieve freedom and success. And I happen to know that he applies a bunch of this in the situation of preparing businesses for exit, and he's got some business exit experience himself. So, James, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Corey. Happy to chat today.
So, listen, before we get into all your, the family business experience side, whether it's how you help clients, whether it's why you have a focus in prepping folks for M&A and how you got there. Before we get into any of that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm guessing like a business systems efficiency expert that helps folks get ready for sale and all that stuff. Probably wasn't it when you were younger, but you tell me.
No, it definitely wasn't. I actually really like, this is geeking out a bit, I love the idea of drawing up house plans, and I thought I wanted to be an architect, but I also had in my mind that they didn't make any money. So I also wanted to be an orthodontist just to try and get some bankroll coming in as well. I was surrounded by small business throughout my childhood. So being in business in some way, shape or form was probably always going to be a thing for me because it was so in my blood.
Well, it's always fascinating when I meet people like that because, and how we all come to entrepreneurship, because I was the opposite. I had nobody in my family practically that everybody worked for somebody. So it's much more understandable how somebody like you became an entrepreneur. I still haven't figured out where I got that gene, but I got it from somewhere. So, it's pretty funny. So where did you grow up? People might be trying to place the accent. It doesn't mean that, so where did you grow up and where are you?
That's Australia, mate. Yeah, so I'm born and bred in Adelaide. So we're not Sydney, Melbourne or anything like that. We're not over on the other side of Australian Perth. We're halfway in the middle, which is, for me, where people joke that we're a bit of a quiet country town or a big country town. There's only about 1 million or so people live here, and it still only takes 20 minutes to get somewhere, but you've got everything you need. So I love it. But we're on the doorstep of places like the Barossa Valley and McLaren Vale. And I spent much of my formative years around the Barossa Valley as well, in the wine industry and manufacturing there as well. So I felt it was a really good upbringing in terms of being exposed to a lot of things, but still having that close-knit community.
I love it. And one more question looking back, what was your first deal of any type? It could have been something when you were much younger or early in your career at some point, anything you consider a deal.
Yeah, I used to loan money to people at school and charge probably what feels like, I wasn't exactly a big kid, but I feel like if I reflect on it, it was probably almost loan shark type of interest. If I lend you $1 today, you'll pay me back $1.20 tomorrow. And I had like my little James bank going on, and that happened, I think, through my sort of middle school years, year 6, 7, 8. I haven't reflected on that in a long time, but yeah, it was just something that happened organically, and it was probably just helping mates out and things like that. But I guess there was a bit of an upkick for me on the back end of it as well. So
I love it. Hey, listen, 20% daily interest. Yeah, that's up there. Oh, I love it. I love it. All right. So listen, let's talk about your career working up to this. In your bio, it mentions manufacturing. You just mentioned wine. It mentions accommodations, and I know a little bit, about that was a family business. So talk to us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. After leaving school, I actually went into engineering thinking I wanted to become a mechanical engineer. I loved the mechanics and motorsport and things like that, but I really didn't want to just get into the theory of it. So I soon after went and worked in the wine industry in the Barossa, actually making wine barrels as a cooper. And I learned a lot about manufacturing and quality assurance. And that industry is a very big balance between artisan skills versus high-tech machinery. And so it was an amazing opportunity to learn how those things melded together, but how do we get the result that we need without overdoing it in terms of the budget, for time invested per barrel, let's say. Then I left there and actually went back to the big smoke of Adelaide from the Barossa. So that's a bit tongue in cheek because they're both small. I went to go study marketing, and I really just did it to get a ticket, say, hey, James can actually do something and stay committed to it until he gets the piece of paper. I kind of knew I was probably never going to actually use it in life in terms of to go get a job, because I knew that working for other people probably wasn't for me. And I actually found the psychology side of things probably most fascinating about marketing, in terms of understanding buyer and consumer behavior and what people say versus what they actually do, being two very different things. And that around about the same time, I fell into running a family business. And I do mean fell into running it. My mother, who'd been running that business for a decade, said, will you look after it for me for 6 months while I take a bit of time away? And I said, no, but I'll run it from now on. She came back an hour later and said, done. And so I took over at end of financial year, and she walked out and I walked in. So I was 24 years old. That was a bit of a baptism of fire. And it was not lost on me that it was my mother's entire life savings that I had basically stepped into trying to look after. And to be frank, it was a very rundown business with very, very rundown facilities, with a lease that was just about to expire. And having a lease that was just about to expire in a accommodation industry, not great, because you can't exactly pick up and move elsewhere. So that was very, very formative in my early years.
Wow. So talk to a little bit, because I know you ended up selling that business. So talk to us about the journey of taking this business that obviously had challenges when you took it over, and not to mention the pressure of it being your, net worth, so to speak. And then eventually getting to, I'm assuming if you were able to sell it, it was a lot of work that went into it, from bringing it from that stage to the stage it was at. And I also know that certainly had influence on what you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, when I think back to, important deals that happened during the different points in life, the renegotiation of that lease within probably the first year of me taking over was a big one. And it was actually the landlord happened to be a father of someone who I went to school with, who had always been basically driving a Ferrari from day dot that I knew him. So that sort of sets the tone. And, but in terms of who he was and how I could interact with him, at least I knew where he stood. He was looking, out for himself completely, but at least you know where you stand in terms of what's the wants and what's the needs. So we actually managed to come to an amicable agreement where we, did some investment in the place, and we got that next tenure for our lease. And that at least gave us some stability to move forwards. And I was very fortunate that at that time in that industry, online travel agents had just become a really big thing. And so it was he who is first basically wins in that type of industry. And we were really maximizing our usage of those platforms and seeing how the market was using it. And we over doubled our revenue in the first 18 months. Wow. Purely by doing dynamic pricing and selling online, as I guess they called it distressed inventory back then. But that was a really big step forwards. And once we had that, we actually had a lot of cash flow coming in, and then we were able to really reinvest back into the facilities. Much later on, we ended up negotiating like a 30-year lease, which gave us a lot more stability. It also gave us bandwidth to be able to sell the business with still a good lease in play. So I feel like I went through about 10 different waves of enthusiasm and I'm over this, and enthusiasm and I'm over this over the probably 20 years that I ran it, keeping in mind that in the last probably 6-7 years I was running it, we had COVID as well, that was a whole new ball game.
Wow. So going back to the conversation, so you renegotiated the lease, and then this key thing happened, early adopter, right, on the online. What year was that?
We're talking about 06, 07.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 06, 07. So yeah, very, very interesting, right? Because that was a time, and the fact that you were able to take advantage of that. And then, well, before we even get to COVID, it was 06, '07, had the global financial crisis. At least that's what we called it here in the States.
Yeah. And it very much impacted us in Australia as well. And the great opportunity for us is we were a mid-range accommodation.
Yeah.
And rightly or wrongly, all the big corporates were looking to tighten their belt, or at least be seen to tighten their belt. And so they would actually pull back from staying at the typical 4.5, 5-star accommodation and drop down maybe half a star. And we, during a 3-month period of time after the GFC, around about September of '08, we had 3 of our record months.
Wow.
So it's all about looking for the opportunities.
Yes.
And it wasn't necessarily that we did anything different. So we pretty much lucked out with that. But we were also trying to balance out when the GFC came through, we were like, well, should we hold back on reinvesting the facility because we had all this great cash at bank to be able to go and do the work that we knew that we needed to do? And we decided, well, should we hold off or should we dive in? And we really just reflected upon if we were going to have a higher quality facility in a bust versus a high quality facility in a boom, in both of them, they're going to be more attractive for customers to stay. And so thinking that this was only, this too will pass, we basically went pretty hard into reinvesting the facilities. And it was a very V-shaped recession for us over in Australia. It didn't slowly come out of it, more so like the COVID type of era. So we actually came out quite quickly and it went straight back into some pretty prime territory in terms of the budgets and things like that within only a year or so.
Wow, that's phenomenal. So you were able to so you didn't need to raise capital or even get money. You were able to cash flow for the most part, the renovation and reinvestment in the property.
Yeah, absolutely. Mind you, I was still very early in my years it was the first years we were really starting to make proper money. And when you're starting to spend money almost as fast as it comes in CapEx, and then at a certain time of year, you get this great big tax bill and you go, oh, okay, so these are the lessons you learn when you're in your 20s running a business that, you wish you got taught when you're a little bit younger. But it was very formative. That's what I'll say. It was very formative, Corey.
I love it. Well, last question on this, then we're going to move on. But is the tax system in Australia similar to the US where CapEx has to be amortized over 15 years, over a long period of years? You can't expense that money in the year you spend it?
Yeah, correct. We have about a 20 and sometimes 30, depending on what the government's doing, a tax write-off in the first year. But when we were spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars, you couldn't exactly, sweep that under the carpet. So there was a big tax bill to pay and we needed to work out how to get the cash flow whilst still trying to keep the refurbishment momentum going as well.
Love it. All right. So let's jump to the sale. So what had you decide it was time to sell, that you were in the position to sell, whether that was you had obviously brought the property up, whether it was market conditions, whether it was personal decision? Talk to us about that decision.
Sure. So skipping forward from that era that we were just talking about, I actually systemized the business such that I didn't need to be working it anymore and went from working 120-hour weeks to really only being needed in the day-to-day about half an hour a month. And that was really just approving batch payments and things like that I didn't want to let go of that final straw, basically. That was when I binged a lot of business development, as you mentioned in my bio. And by the time I got to about 2016, 17, 18, I was already quite bored. I'd already refined the business quite a lot and I knew I wanted to do something different. My mother had been out of the business for a very long time by that point, and it certainly wasn't a passion of hers anymore. And so we knew that building towards an exit was really something that we wanted to do. And whilst having a really good team in place made the business not too draining on us, I really wanted to be able to shift my attention completely away from having that business on my shoulders, even though there was a good team there. And then COVID happened. COVID completely stripped that back. So we were preparing for a sale. COVID came along and I think we went to our peak months were probably about 85, 90% occupancy. And in that particular month, we were 2% occupancy. And that really changed everything. We were down to our last couple of grand probably after putting a lot of our own capital in. And we did come through. There were some government incentives that helped us coast through and the market was extremely slow to return. But that was actually something I picked up very early on with the market would be very slow to return. I figured probably about 2025, 2026 is when the market would truly come back for international travel, which seems to be ringing about true over here. And so I knew I had to do something different and we ended up completely shutting down our reception and offshoring it to the Philippines and had a team of 5 over there. And so we already had a reservation check-in kiosk out the front that we use for after hours arrivals. and we switched to using that 100% of the time and just stopped serving people in person. It stripped about $250,000 off of the bill for team members. It wouldn't have been viable to run the business the old-fashioned way anyway. So that was what we did, and it really transformed the configuration of the business. But also coming out of COVID, it made it far more profitable and highly appetizing for an incoming purchaser.
Wow. Love that. And then we didn't need details on your deal or specifically, but was it a strategic buyer, somebody in the industry? Was it a financial buyer? Like who?
We had we knew that for that particular premises, that property, that it was maybe on the cusp of an investor style, but probably more so with people who were in the industry. And I'd say 90% of the people that came through had premises already, they had facilities in the industry. And I guess in terms of what I think about what we did well that set up for an easy sale was that we advertised that there was only about 4 hours per week of leadership time involved in the business. And most of the prospective purchasers that came in through and said, I don't believe you. And that was very much a driving force for when we reconfigured the business post-COVID. That was something I wanted, was it for it to be have minimal involvement from myself. And so when we did sell it and we walked through and we showed prospective purchasers the team overseas, and they could just chat to them on the big TV with a computer and a webcam on the back of it and see that it was a real going concern and operating in a healthy fashion. From listing to due diligence, it was, I think, about 10 days. We closed off after having, I think, 7 or 8 interested prospects. We got 7 offers from those. I think it was 10 prospects. We had 7 offers, 3 of which were cash, and it made the decision very, very quick and easy. We did have someone back down, but within, I think, 48 hours, the broker had renegotiated with the next person to get the same cash price. So the value of having a good broker, right up there.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so now you've exited the family business. In terms of like coming to create BizTech Guru and everything, had you started working on that, or was that something you did post-exit?
It was something I was tinkering with while I was running the motel. And one of the great opportunities of COVID was, the motel was pretty much dead in the water for a very extended period of time. And so I had time on my hands. And so that was really where I doubled down and started to put full time into that business. And in the early period of time, you mentioned about me talking with a lot of business brokers, I felt that in terms of what I was offering, which was helping people to have outsource the processes and systemization of a business, that business brokers would be the best people to talk to because they're really dealing with the end game. They're dealing with people who are looking for exit. And I was really quite shocked with some of the stats that they were giving me. And from a few different sources, one was that 80% of prospective vendors overpriced. 80%, which blew my head in terms of understanding that those 80% that overpriced generally meant it sat on the market for more than 60 days, which generally meant that they had to drop the price below what was advised earlier, which generally meant that they were taking far less than they ever probably could have, which is quite sad, really. Yeah. That was one stat from one broker that I was talking with, but another one who she's an industry veteran, been in the game for about 45, 50 years, and her team do about 200 valuations a year, that's a lot. That's a lot of valuations. And she said to me when we're talking about systems and profit and things like that within a business, she said, I don't care what systems a business has if it's not making profit. Don't come talk to me unless your business is making profit, which I love that, getting down to brass tacks. So don't talk to her if it's not making profit. And then the golden words for her were under management. Just like, regardless of the systems and processes, people don't necessarily see that when they're selling. It's actually how much of this is a going concern without owner involvement. That's really what is going to ratchet up another, maybe 1+ on the multiple for the sale of a business.
Yeah. And I know you know this, but that's all I'll prompt you on it. And that's even assuming the business is, low evaluations is one thing, but whether the business is saleable at all or not is really the first question, right?
Well, and that was one of the things, again, all these stats that they were spruiking to me, and it's a really important element. Anyone who doesn't know business brokers, their data is their value in terms of understanding what true market value is. And she said to me, 80% of the people that approached her for evaluation didn't have a saleable going concern. So we're talking, and we're not talking about maybe selling your website URL and your phone number. That's not selling a contact list, is not selling a business, right? And so That's 80% of the people who sought out to get a valuation on their business. If you think about all those people who didn't even bother to go get a valuation of business, you're talking in terms of saleable businesses, you're talking low single digits, which is pretty scary in the scheme of things for how much time and effort of people and how much of a proportion of people's life is pumped into these small businesses to get nothing at the end of the game.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You mentioned earlier that you were fascinated on the marketing side when you were, did some schooling and stuff around that and experience with the psychology, right? Right. And I'm fascinated by psychology, by mindset, right? And my listeners are probably tired of hearing me say that I think everything starts with mindset. And I don't care what skills or other things you developed. If you have limiting beliefs or other mindset issues or whatever, right? You're not going to implement them. So, before we get into more specifically the types of things that you actually do in terms of systemization, in terms of having owners be able to remove themselves, I'm assuming because you're dealing with humans, that mindset comes into play and that probably, well, I'm going to say, you can tell me and feel free to tell me if I'm wrong. I would think if I'm in your business that like a lot of our businesses, it's not, oh, hey, here's a system. I don't understand the system or whatever. Whether people are going to really implement it successfully and whether they're going to be able to get out of the way, whether they're going to build a management team, whether they're going to do what needs to be taken. I got to assume that mindset plays a big, big role in that, the ones that are successful or not. But tell me if I'm off or if I'm on, expand, please.
You hit the nail on the head. And when I think about one of the common conversations I have with people that they might come to me and say, hey, James, look, I really want your help to get this stuff done. And I had someone who, I'll try and keep this as anonymous as possible, runs a fairly substantial company, probably a team of about 30 people, plus some sort of labor hire contractors. They're up around the $30 million annual revenue mark I'll say they're in the mining and engineering sector. And that individual's working 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day. And he said, I really need help to get this done. I'm like, that sounds fantastic. And you truly sound like he was talking about being able to spend time with his wife and spend time with the kids and things like that. And I said, it's going to be a very dramatic change from you going from over here, working those type of numbers. And I've done them and I know what life is like when you do that, to going way over here. Because he's saying, I want to be able to choose whether I work on a Tuesday or not. That's going to take you being a different person.
Okay.
And the difference between that over there and that over there is you letting go. There's a lot of letting go, not a little bit. There is a chasm of letting go that needs to occur. And I think that probably comes back to this point you bring up about mindset, in that I love the saying, progress beats perfection, and understanding that if you're trying to get every granular little part just right before you're willing to let go of it, then you're always going to move too slowly. And one of my long-term mentors, I remember him saying to me that every business, every good performing business has a little bit of chaos going on. And if you don't, it probably means that you're moving too slowly. And I really take that on board when I work with people.
Yeah, love that. I love that. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. All right, so let's talk about what you do for companies. And obviously, when I love that it's so interesting. I mean, a lot of people who do what you do or similar to what you do, right? Helping people systemize, make things more efficient, even have them work less. Although obviously they're aware and they may say, well, one of the results is that also you can sell your business. I love the fact, I don't think most of them go to business brokers as their sort of testing ground or sounding board for starting a business like that, right? Because listen, there are reasons totally unrelated to exit, right? Totally related to valuation on why it makes sense to have a systemized business that runs efficiently, right? More profit, less time. But I love the fact that you approached it from that and came through the lens. So, but let's talk about, the kind of things you do for folks. And obviously it helps both exit and both, while, even if you never can exit. I mean, in fact, I say that all the time to folks, whether it's in various areas, like all of the things that make you a better candidate for an exit at a higher valuation are just great business practices that you should probably be doing anyway, right? So yeah, tell the audience more about what you do for us.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. I think exactly what you just said there, which is if you're thinking about selling a business and you think about, well, put yourself on the other side and think about what you'd want if you were buying a business, right? You would want a team that's established, it's stable, there's no drama, there's no chaos. You'd want it to not have key person dependency, right? You want to make sure that if someone fell ill or got an offer or moved on to a different career, that it might be an inconvenience, but it's good, it's fine. You want to make sure that there's stability in terms of suppliers and customers, that maybe there's contracts in place on both sides. So there's that stability. Like boring businesses are the best type of businesses, right? And so understanding that those type of things in place and it's running as a true going concern, independent of what the business owner happens to be doing or not be doing, that's what a really valuable business is. So if you put yourself in the lens of you selling your business, what are the things that you're going to do to try and create that as a scalable entity, right? And so, yeah, I help people with implementing processes. And one of the things that I don't do straight off the bat, which is a bit weird, is we don't go in and optimize. And that's not normal.
Yeah.
It can come later, but it's not the first thing we focus on. And it comes from the premise that if you've got an established business that's got a team under it and it's profitable, and let's ignore whether it can make more money, but that's not a broken business.
Right.
And the true value is actually bottling what you're already doing that's working such that you can spread that knowledge around the team, right? Such that it reduces those key persons of dependence. So that once you have that transfer of knowledge being a little bit more fluid, and once you can have a team stand back and look at the process on a piece of paper or on a screen and go, what do you think we should do? And you can collectively talk and go, well, I reckon the third step there, if we added this chunk in there, that might work. It's a lot easier to do that than to conceptualize in conversation between people who know that task well, because you're not really looking at the same page. People are conceptualizing how they do it versus how the other person does it, and you don't really have a meeting of the minds. So getting that framework for your formula for how your business does whatever it does to create value for you and for your customer, getting that locked down is always the first thing we focus on, because that's where the wins are. Because when you get that humming well, you can actually start to create a business that doesn't depend on the business owner being there.
Yeah. I'm curious on your take. I had a conversation literally this morning. It's not the first time I've had it, but it came up this morning on a group call of actually Entrepreneurs Organization member lawyers. So these are unusual lawyers who are true entrepreneurs. It came up with this conversation. People were talking about systems. And, I raised this conversation. I had a breakthrough, 20 years ago. And I always am frustrated that I can't remember who the guys who led this workshop were, because I'd want to credit them. But they had a thing, they raised this conversation of the unconscious competent, right?
Mm-hmm.
The person who's really good at what they do, but they have no idea how they do it, right? So, you can think about it as your top salesperson, you're trying to train other people on it. But a lot of times when you go to the top salesperson, they just look at it like, I'm just talented at this. I don't have any systems. I don't know. And the thing that, and it applies across the board. And the thing that they had us run through this exercise where we took something that we were very good at, right? And their claim was that you are unconscious to it, but you probably have a system, right? There's a way you do it. And for me, I always have been good at business development, right? Bringing in clients. And I did relate to it much more like a talent, right? Like some people are good at, and I had some things like I'm personable. I really care about people. I listen, blah, 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 whatever. So I had some characteristics of what I thought, but I did not relate to it in any way like I had a system. And they took us through this exercise, and I realized I had a system. Like I pretty much did the same thing every time, right? These were the days when you would meet people in person, right? Back in the day, you wouldn't get a client unless you met them in person. Totally different these days. I pretty much never meet them. But, so they would come into my office and I would greet them in a certain way. I would reference the referral source or the connection, right, to establish that relationship. I would ask them questions about that business. If they asked me about pricing, I'd always put it off, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I'd want to hear more from them. Listen, I want to understand your needs better or whatever. All right. I would ask follow-up questions. I would listen closely. They would effectively then tell me, like, I would never do anything that wasn't true, right, in terms of our capabilities or who I am or whatever. But when you ask a lot of questions and listen, they basically tell me what they wanted to hear in terms of how I would direct all our capabilities, which I would focus on and how I would present it. And it was always authentic to what we did, but there's a choice in terms of how, whether I focus on this or that. So I won't go too far down that road, but it was a revelation to me to figure out that this thing that I just thought I was good at, which I actually had a system on how I did it and didn't even realize that I had a system, that I did it the same way, pretty much. Like the elements of it were the same every time. I see you shaking your head. So like, you're the expert at this. This was just a personal discovery for me, although it has affected the way because what that meant to me was not only, hey, do I have a system, but actually, and their point was, if you could figure out what the system is behind your unconscious competence, that actually gives you the ability to train people on it. And yes, there may be some art and talent to it as well, and it may not fit them directly. And I'm not saying they're going to be as good as you the minute you hand them the steps, but it gets you far along the way, and then they could play with that and improve and find their own way. So in any case, yeah, I'd love to hear your view on that.
Yeah, that topic comes up a lot because when we talk with people, and salespeople are a prime example, they're like, oh, I don't know how I do it. I just do it because it's in muscle memory, right? And you talk about unconscious competence, and the easiest way is to think about someone learning to drive a car for the first time. And when they start to drive a car, they start off as unconsciously incompetent because they are unaware of just how bad they are at driving.
Right.
And once they've been driving for a little bit, they're like, oh my gosh, I am horrible at this. They are consciously incompetent. Then once they start to get better, they become consciously competent because they're like, okay, I'm getting better at doing this. I'm focusing on doing this, that, and the other. And then eventually, once I start driving a car a lot, they become unconsciously competent. And the example I'll give is brushing your teeth. You have a formula, Corey, for how you brush your teeth, right? The thing is, do you have it written down? No, you don't get leverage from having it written down how you brush your teeth. I would have to have a very loving partner to brush our teeth if we were a bit time poor, right? And I don't know how that would work anyway. But the example of brushing teeth is I use because everyone has it. Everyone probably does it the exact same way, or maybe with a slight variation every single day. But if you were quizzed on how to do it in the moment, you wouldn't really know how to do it because it's in your muscle memory. And when we work with people, there is a methodology we use to get people to unpack what is it that they do so well that we can identify the best practice for the business from how they're doing what they do. So they have that time, that opportunity to unpack, well, how is it that I do what I do, such that when I get into a conversation with someone like James, that I can actually speak to the specificity of what I actually do and how it creates the result that we create.
Yeah. And so you don't need to give away any trade secrets or whatever, but you said you have a process. Like, just at a high level, what are some of the things that, like, how do you help people unpack that?
It's good questions, Corey. It's good questions. We make sure that people have the time and the mental space, the freedom of thought to be able to go and do it. Because if we're going to bail someone up at 4:45 before knockoff and say, oh, hey, can you just quickly tell me how you do this? Don't expect to get a good result.
Yeah.
So there is a degree of priming people, helping them understand and then appreciate the outcome that we're trying to do, that not we're trying to gain this knowledge from them so that we can fire them or so we can automate themselves out of a job. We help them appreciate what's the value for the business. What's in it for you if we do this? How will it make your life easier if we get you to share what you know and what you do so well? Think about the performance that we'll do for the business. Think about what it might do for creating free time for you. If you feel guilty about having a sick day because you don't feel like anyone else can truly support you while you have time off, then by getting this stuff out of your head will help other people to step in and just keep things floating while you're not able to work. So helping identify what's the result that team member would actually value for themselves and help them see that that's one of the things that we're trying to achieve here from getting all these systems and processes out of people's heads and making them available to the rest of the team in the business.
I love it. I won't go down the rabbit hole on this because there's a lot of value, but on this particular piece, Les McEwen has a book called, what is it called again? He talks about different stages of a business. The name will come to me, but he talks about different stages of a business. He talks about how in the beginning, you're in struggle, just try to figure out how to make money, whatever. Then you get to a stage that he calls fun, where it's like you as the visionary, usually you have an operator, executor who makes stuff happen for you. You're starting to make some money. You don't have a lot of problems because you're small, right? Whatever. And, you could stay there. I mean, obviously it's a riskier business because it could be adversely affected by economy and things like that, whatever. But, there are plenty of people staying fun. But if you want to go to scale and get predictable success, that's the name of the book, get to predictable success, you inevitably go through a period called whitewater, right? Because that's what he calls it, right? And there are some other models that talk about similar things. But what he talks about is, and this is more related to what you're talking about, is also the type of people. So you have a visionary who starts the business, then you have this executor, operator person who actually makes stuff happen because the visionary, like, we're not good at that stuff, right? But that person very often has the stuff in their heads. And in fact, going back to the mindset and psychology of it, they often are always the heroes. They're always the ones that figure out how to get it done. The problem is it's not scalable. And they sometimes, and you alluded to this, right? I love the way you described it, because that person can feel threatened when the systemizer comes in, right? Because they get a lot of ego and psychological value about being the one who always can figure it out and get it done, until they can't, because it's scaled to a point where it's impossible. So it's an interesting transition to have that person who is so key, because they're usually the ones that have everything in their head, and to have them be willing to systemize and not be concerned that they're going to lose their value or not be worried about their job, even in a worst case scenario. So it's interesting how, for me, Les McEwen's work so relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah. You're probably familiar with Dan Sullivan. Most people are. And he talks about, in business, you've got to dream it up, make it real, and make it recur.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the make it recur part is where most people suck.
Yes.
That's where people don't understand the formula for how to get things off their plate and to make it scale without being dependent on the owner, or maybe even that 2IC, that key person. And if you ignore the interpersonal attributes of this, it won't work.
Yeah.
If you go and grab some templates of processes off of the internet, and even if you go to the extra degree of like adding the 20% to customize them so they suit your business, I mean, that's great. But if you ignore the fact that you've got a team that are humans and that you need to put your marketing hat on, you need to sell what's in it for them. Why should they care about doing what you're putting in front of them? Because they're looking out for number one, and subconsciously or consciously, they are looking out for number one. And so if you don't make sure there's buy-in from the team such that they're like, yeah, I see how if I get on board with this, it will make my life easier. Maybe it will make other people more competent in the business such that there's less stuff that I have to fix from them. Or maybe it's that I get so guilty when I take time off, like I mentioned before, that I don't feel like I can truly step away from work because my mind's there. I'm always on emails on my phone. Everyone's got some trigger that would help them really appreciate the value of processes such that they can actually be bought into this whole idea of, well, how about we have more certainty, clarity, and direction in the business?
Yeah. Yeah. Love this conversation because it's so fascinating to me. And it's what I think you're right. I mean, there's the challenge that people have, right? When they want to grow and scale, and the human element of it. There's no joke that, business would be easy if you didn't have any customers, clients, or employees, right? It's sort of, an interesting way to think about it. And listen, don't get me wrong. I actually get a lot of joy out of my clients and my employees. But, in those tough times, that's what you think, because it's humans that cause, right? It's always humans, right? That cause the issues. So it's phenomenal that you come at it from that place, because I do think it makes a big difference in the success of it. Before I get to my final two questions, I know there's a million things we can cover, but anything else in terms of what you specifically do for companies, or what you're seeing out there in terms of trends, or really, anything we haven't covered yet that is, you really want to share with the audience?
I think, Corey, it's as much about that post-COVID, people are really looking for that quality of life.
Yes.
That was a fantastic opportunity for us to really have shoved in our face how important things like human connection is, things like quality of family time. Like during COVID, I got to teach my then 3-year-old daughter how to ride a bike. It was opportunities like that that made me go like, so my office now is in my backyard. It's fantastic. So I leave the house and I walk the 15 meters and I come into my office, and that opportunity to have an improved quality of life such that when my kids get home from work, that I can go and say hello to them. Ideally, I'm, not in a meeting that's too important or anything like that. I think that has helped people realize that what they want from their business and what they might achieve. And relating back to we talking about having a saleable business, a business that has all those elements of what you want when you sell a business will actually help you while you run the business until you do want to move on from it.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, the conversation you raised about people reevaluating their relationship to work or is something that is a topic around my house because my wife has a book coming out on May 6th called Intentional Ambition. And what she explored and interviewed a chunk of people on is there coming out of COVID and some other developments, how did that, what is their relationship to work, how it's shifting, and underlying that, what's their relationship to ambition, and what are healthy drivers of ambition and what are unhealthy drivers of ambition, and, really re-examining that. And she interviewed a bunch of people. So it's a fascinating topic. And I do think that things like COVID, like you mentioned, have people really reevaluate all kinds of aspects of their life, and certainly their relationship to work, or if they're, a business owner, the relationship to how they're running their business. So yeah, it's a topic we've talked about a lot because my wife's book is coming out on May 6th. Cool. So listen, if people want to find out more about you, your company, what you do, where do they go?
LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on. Just look for me, James Brown, systemologist there, but also my website, biztechguru.com.au is a great place to find out more about me.
Right. Do you work with clients only in Australia, or do you work with clients outside of Australia?
At the moment, probably about half of my clients, depending on the configuration of how I work with people, are actually happen to be in the States at the moment. But generally, anything that's Australia time zone friendly is the thing that works well.
Love it. All right. So my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, James, which is freedom. And you started to allude to this already. For me, it means, everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
If I think about freedom, for me, it's freedom of choice. Freedom of choice to be the same way you've always been, if that's what works for you right now, or to do something completely different, even if it's dramatically different from what you do. Freedom to choose without guilt, without judgment. That's what freedom means to me.
I love it. James, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Great chatting to you today. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to cupforlaw.com. That's cupforlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.